A pregnant wife receives a call from the police about an incident involving her husband and rushes to the hospital. Upon arriving, she discovers something that leaves her in shock. The phone rang at 3:14 in the afternoon, a shrill sound that cut through the silence of the nursery. Laura Thompson was on her knees on the floor, her 8-month belly resting on her thighs, as she folded a tiny onesie in a yellow so soft it looked like sunlight. She smiled, imagining her son's little face inside it. Then the phone rang again. She got up with difficulty, her hand flat on the small of her back, and answered on speaker without checking the number. "Hello?" The voice on the other end wasn't anyone she knew. It was deep, male, with an official tone that made the hairs on her arms stand up. "Mrs. Thompson, Laura Thompson." "Yes, that's me. This is the State Patrol. Your husband, Michael Thompson, was in a car accident on I-5 heading toward Portland." The air in her lungs froze. The yellow onesie slipped from her hand and fell to the floor. "Accident? Is he okay?" The pause on the other end of the line lasted an eternity. "He's alive, ma'am. He was taken to Mercy General Hospital. But he wasn't alone." The final sentence hung in the air, loaded with a weight she couldn't decipher right away. He wasn't alone. Of course he wasn't. He must have been with a client, maybe closing an important deal. Michael was a sales manager at a luxury car dealership. He lived for work. "Who was he with?" she asked, her voice already a thread. "We don't have that information in the report, ma'am. Just that the passenger was also taken in. You need to come to the hospital right away." The officer hung up. Laura stood there, phone in hand, her gaze fixed on the fallen onesie. He wasn't alone. The phrase echoed, taking on a new, darker, sharper contour. A tremor started in her hands and moved down to her legs. She leaned on the dresser, her breathing short, gasping. It wasn't a client. She felt it. It was something different. Without thinking, she grabbed her purse, the car keys, and left the apartment, closing the door without locking it. In the elevator, the mirror reflected an image of a woman she barely recognized. Pale face, wide eyes, the huge, pregnant belly looking like a fragile shield against whatever awaited her. The tears came without warning, silent, hot tears streaming down her face as she drove through the rainy and upscale streets of Seattle. Every red light was torture, every slow car in front of her an unbearable obstacle. The officer's phrase wouldn't leave her head, hammering along with the pulse in her temples. He wasn't alone. Mercy General Hospital was a chaos of white beeps and hurried voices. The smell of disinfectant invaded her nostrils, causing instant nausea. She approached the reception desk, her heart pounding wildly against her ribs. "My husband, Michael Thompson. He was in an accident." The receptionist, a woman with tired eyes, typed the name into the computer without haste. "He's in the ER, Wing B. Talk to the charge nurse at the desk at the end of the hall." Laura thanked her with a nod and walked, feeling the pitying stares from people in the hallways. The pregnant woman, the desperate wife. Each step was heavy. The hallway seemed endless. At the Wing B desk, an older nurse with a stern expression was waiting. "Laura Thompson?" "Yes?" "Your husband is stable. He fractured his left arm and has some abrasions, but he's conscious. The doctor will talk to you soon." A relief washed over her body, so intense her legs buckled. Alive. Conscious. She grabbed the counter to keep from falling. "And the other person, the one with him?" The nurse looked at her for a second, a glint of what seemed like compassion in her eyes. "His passenger is in the bed next door, minor injuries." The word passenger sounded strange, too intimate. The nurse handed her a clipboard with an admission form. "I need you to sign here, please." Laura took the pen, but her eyes were drawn to the top of the page. There was his name in some staff member's hasty handwriting. "Patient, Michael Thompson, bed 14. Passenger, Jessica Ramirez. If you like our stories, give us a like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you." The name hit her like a punch to the stomach. The air was stolen from her lungs. It couldn't be. Jessica Ramirez, the neighbor from Unit 1202, the yoga instructor with a sweet smile and a quiet husband. The woman who 3 days ago knocked on her door to give her a jar of homemade jam and ask with shining eyes if she was feeling the baby kick a lot yet. The same Jessica who held her hand and said, "You're going to be an amazing mom, Laura. I have so much admiration for you." The blood drained from her face. The clipboard slipped from her fingers and hit the floor with a dry thud. The sound of the heart monitors, a doctor's page over the intercom, a child's cry somewhere in the hallway. Everything merged into a high-pitched, distant buzz. She brought her hand to her belly, an instinctive gesture of protection, and her knees gave out. She fell right there in the middle of the hospital hallway, the world reduced to that name written on a form. Jessica, the neighbor, the friend, the mistress. The floor was cold and hard under her knees. For a moment, the world boiled down to that sensation. The cold seeping through her jeans, the pressure on her bones, the dull ache that was a distant echo of the real pain settling in her chest. The nurse approached, her voice worried, cutting through the buzz in her ears. "Mom? Mom, are you okay?" Someone helped her up, firm hands under her arms, and guided her to an uncomfortable plastic chair against the wall. She sat, but her body didn't feel like hers. It was a heavy, hollow shell, with a dead weight in her belly that, for the first time, wasn't her son, but the weight of betrayal. Jessica Ramirez. The name was a poison spreading through her veins. Every memory, every interaction with the neighbor, now reconfigured under a sickly and cruel light. The unexpected visits with the excuse of borrowing a cup of sugar. The elevator chats, where Jessica always found a way to ask about Michael, about his job, about the trips. "He must work so hard, poor guy. You need to take good care of him, Laura." The phrase, which before sounded like female solidarity, now was mockery, a disguised stab. The clearest and most painful memory came next. A Sunday, 2 months ago, at the building's rooftop barbecue. A neighborhood get-together. Laura was sitting tired from the advancing pregnancy, while Michael was at the grill with the other guys. Jessica approached, sat next to her, and placed her hand on her belly. "Can I feel?" she asked with a sweetness that now made her nauseous, and then, with her gaze fixed on hers, said, "It's such a magical connection, isn't it? Between mother and child, nothing can break that." There, sitting in the sterile hospital hallway, Laura understood the depth of that lie. It wasn't just an affair, a slip-up. It was a performance, a cruel play staged right under her nose in the place she called home. The neighbor didn't want to be her friend. She wanted a front-row seat to watch her life, maybe to compare herself, maybe out of pure sadism. Every question about the pregnancy, every tip about vitamins and morning sickness wasn't empathy. It was intelligence gathering. It was a way to gauge the terrain, to know how oblivious the pregnant wife was to the world of lies her husband was building. A young doctor with thin-rimmed glasses and a serious expression stopped in front of her. "Mrs. Thompson, I'm Dr. Patel, the attending. Your husband is out of danger. The distal radius fracture in his left arm will need immobilization, but no neurological damage. He got lucky." The word lucky sounded like an insult. Lucky to be alive to face the destruction he caused. "Can I see him?" Laura asked, her voice hoarse, unrecognizable. The doctor hesitated. "He's sedated right now for pain management. And the other patient is in the same observation room. Maybe it's better to wait a bit." "No," Laura said, with a firmness that surprised herself. "I want to see him now." The doctor observed her, the professional gaze trying to decipher what lay behind that cold determination. She saw the prominent belly, the pale face, the eyes that no longer shed tears but held a storm. She nodded. "All right. This way." The observation room was separated from the hallway only by a green curtain. The doctor pulled it aside, and the scene revealed itself. 2 beds, side by side. On the right, Michael. His left arm wrapped in a white splint, his face scratched, his eyes closed under the sedative's effect. Even unconscious, his expression looked guilty. On the left bed, less than 6 feet from him, was Jessica. She had a bandage on her forehead near the hairline and was staring at the ceiling with glazed eyes. She didn't see her enter. She was lost in her own world of pain and consequences. Laura stood frozen at the entrance, a statue of ice. The air grew thick, heavy, hard to breathe. There they were, together. The living proof, side by side, of the lie that defined her life, the man she shared a bed with, dreams, the future child, and the woman who offered her homemade jam and motherly advice. The intimacy of that scene was more devastating than any confession. They weren't just lovers. They shared an accident, a hospital bed, a fate. They were a unit. And she was the outsider, the piece that didn't fit in that equation of betrayal. It was then that Jessica slowly turned her head and her eyes met Laura's. The recognition was instant, followed by a wave of panic that contorted her features. Jessica's lips parted, but no sound came out. She was a fish out of water, gasping for the air that the truth had stolen from her. The fear on her face was ugly, devoid of any dignity. There was no remorse there, just the terror of being caught. In that gaze, Laura didn't see the smiling neighbor, the yoga instructor, the friend. She saw a cornered predator. Laura didn't look away. She held the gaze, feeling a cold, cutting strength take over her. There was no room for crying, for screams, for the despair that had consumed her minutes before. There was only a brutal clarity. She took a step into the room, and then another. Each movement was deliberate, heavy. She stopped beside Michael's bed, without looking at him. Her eyes remained fixed on Jessica. He wasn't alone, Laura said, her voice low but resonating in the silence of the room. She repeated the officer's words, throwing them back to their origin. The phrase hit Jessica with the force of a slap. The woman shrank, averting her gaze to the white sheet as if she could hide there. "Laura, she began, her voice a broken whisper. "No," Laura cut her off, her tone icy. "Don't you dare say my name." The silence that followed was broken only by the rhythmic beep of Michael's heart monitor, a constant mechanical sound that marked the time of that new and terrible reality. Laura turned and looked at her husband for the first time. The man she loved, or thought she loved, the father of her child. His face, even at rest, seemed like a stranger's. The features she knew so well that she kissed every morning were now stained by the lie. She extended her hand, but stopped inches from his face. There was no longer the right to touch. What they had, what they built, had shattered on I-5 inside a luxury car with the neighbor in the passenger seat. She stepped away from the bed, her body rigid. The adrenaline that had kept her upright began to fade, giving way to a deep exhaustion coming from the soul. Her belly weighed heavy, and a sharp pain in her lower back made her catch her breath. The baby moved, a strong kick, as if protesting against the anguish surrounding him. She placed her hand over her abdomen, a gesture of protection, and, in that moment of alliance, it was the two of them now, just them. She turned to leave, but stopped at the door. There was one more thing to do, one last piece to move on that board of pain. She took her phone from her purse, her hands trembling slightly. She searched for the contact she'd used only once to confirm attendance at that building barbecue, David Ramirez, Jessica's husband. The quiet civil engineer of few words who always seemed to be in the shadow of his sociable, smiling wife. An honest, hard-working man who, just like her, was about to have his world turned upside down. She felt a pang of hesitation. She was about to detonate another human being's life, but the image of Jessica and Michael side by side on the beds erased any remnant of doubt. The truth, no matter how brutal, needed to be complete. Their lie had created two victims, and the victims deserved to know. She took a deep breath, left the room and walked back down the hallway, finding a more isolated corner near a window overlooking an inner courtyard. Night was already falling over Seattle, cold and indifferent. She dialed the number. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Each ring was one more beat in the countdown to detonation. Laura leaned her forehead against the cold glass of the window, watching the darkness swallow the hospital courtyard. She wondered what David was doing at that exact moment. Maybe watching the news, maybe preparing a solitary dinner, waiting for his wife to return from the extra yoga class or the meet-up with friends. The banality of the lie was what made it so sordid. She wasn't just destroying a marriage, she was tearing the fabric of normality for a man who, until that instant, probably believed he was living an ordinary and safe life. Finally, the call was answered. The voice on the other end was exactly as she remembered. Low, a bit tired, without inflections. "Hello?" Laura swallowed hard, the metallic taste of adrenaline in her mouth. She needed to be direct, clinical. Any trace of emotion in her voice could be misinterpreted as hysteria or confusion. "David, this is Laura, from 1102. There was a short pause, the time for him to process who was calling at that hour. The pregnant neighbor from downstairs. "Laura, is something wrong?" The concern in his voice was genuine, probably imagining a problem with her pregnancy, an emergency. The irony was almost unbearable. "You need to come to Mercy General now," she said, the words coming out firm, almost mechanical. "It's about Jessica." The silence that followed was different from any silence Laura had ever heard. It wasn't a pause to think. It was a dense, heavy vacuum where all the terrible possibilities bloomed at once. She could almost hear him on the other end, piecing together the puzzle. The call from the neighbor, the hospital name, the urgency, his wife's absence to deliver the news. In seconds, the house of cards of his trust began to collapse. She didn't need to say anything else. The omission was the message itself. When he finally spoke, his voice was unrecognizable. The low, tired tone had disappeared, replaced by something dry, hard, like stone. "I'm on my way." The call ended. No questions. No requests for details. The absence of questioning was the most frightening confirmation of all. Maybe deep down, he already knew. Maybe the seed of doubt was already planted, just waiting for the torrential rain of truth to germinate. Men like David, quiet and observant, often see more than they let on. He didn't ask, "What happened?" because the question that really mattered was, "With whom?" And the answer, he perhaps already suspected, wouldn't come from a work accident or a robbery. It would come from something much more intimate and rotten. Laura put away her phone and returned to the plastic chair, her body now weighing a ton. The call had drained the last drop of her strength. She felt complicit and victim, the messenger of the apocalypse and one of its survivors. Time began to drag. Each minute was a small eternity. She watched the movement in the hallway, nurses running, families crying, doctors with impenetrable expressions. A microcosm of pain and relief, and she was there at the epicenter of her own private drama, waiting for the next act to begin. She thought of her son. Her hand returned instinctively to her belly, a safe harbor amid the shipwreck. He kicked again, softer this time, as if sensing her exhaustion. In that moment, a decision formed in her mind, clear and unshakable. That child wouldn't grow up in a home built on the rubble of a lie. He wouldn't have a father whose integrity was a farce, and a mother who diminished herself to fit into a broken marriage. That kick wasn't just fetal movement, it was a reminder that there was a life depending on her strength, her courage. The pain of betrayal was immense, but the love for that being she didn't even know yet was greater, and it would be that love that guided her out of there. 25 minutes later, she saw him. David Ramirez appeared at the end of the hallway, walking with contained urgency. He didn't look desperate, but there was a stiffness in his shoulders and an intensity in his step that betrayed the inner storm. His eyes scanned the area and found her. He approached, his face an impenetrable mask. Up close she could see it. His eyes, usually calm, were dark, and there was a small vein pulsing at his temple. He didn't need explanations. His gaze already said that something fundamental inside him had shattered. "Where is she?" he asked, his voice a raspy whisper. Laura just stood up and nodded toward the green curtain. There was no need for words. They were now unlikely allies, united by the same betrayal, walking together to the epicenter of the disaster. She felt a strange and somber camaraderie with that man she barely knew. Both had been deceived by the two people who should have protected their hearts. She followed him, stopping one step behind as he pulled back the curtain. The scene was the same. Michael still sedated, a monument to his own weakness, and Jessica, who was now sitting on the bed, her legs over the side, as if about to get up. She looked toward the entrance, expecting to see Laura again, but her face fell apart when she saw David standing there, his expression a sentence. The air in the room grew thin. The beep of Michael's heart monitor seemed to mock the scene, an indifferent metronome for the end of two marriages. Jessica brought her hand to her mouth, a dry sob escaping her lips. The panic in her eyes was total. She looked from David to Laura, standing just behind him, and the understanding of the alliance between the two betrayed hit her full force. There was nowhere to run. David took a step forward, his body tense like a steel cable. He looked at his wife, then at the sleeping man on the bed next to her, and the connection between the two facts solidified before his eyes. The disbelief on his face was painful to watch. "Jessica, what is this?" he asked, his voice breaking for the first time. It wasn't a question about the accident. It was about everything. About them being there together in a hospital room. About the nights she came home late, the mysterious phone calls, the subtle distance that had settled between them. Jessica began to cry, a desperate, ugly cry from someone caught with no more excuses. "It was a mistake, David. A mistake," she stammered between sobs, the cliched words sounding hollow and pathetic. "It's not what you think." But it was exactly what he thought. Her denial was an insult to his intelligence. David didn't respond. He just kept staring at her, his silence more accusatory than any shout. His eyes then shifted, landing on Laura. There was a silent question in his gaze, a search for confirmation. Laura just held the gaze, an almost imperceptible nod. "Yes, it's exactly that. Both of us." Laura remained motionless near the door, a silent observer of the ruin she herself had set in motion. She felt no pleasure, no revenge. She felt only an icy void. Watching David's pain was like looking at her own reflection in a broken mirror. She saw the same humiliation, the same disbelief, the same feeling of being made a fool. The woman who asked for pregnancy tips, who pretended admiration, was there, crying for being discovered with another woman's husband. And then a subtle detail she hadn't noticed before jumped out at her. The way Jessica sat, the way her hands rested instinctively on her own abdomen. A terrible, improbable suspicion began to form in Laura's mind, a suspicion that made the whole situation even more grotesque and complex. Laura's gaze narrowed, fixing on Jessica's almost unconscious gesture. Her hand, which before gestured in despair, now rested protectively on the lower part of her abdomen. It was a movement Laura knew intimately, a reflex that had become part of her in the last months. Laura's brain, already overloaded, began connecting dots that before seemed random. Jessica's incessant questions about the first trimester, the curiosity about prenatal vitamins, the conversation about baby names that Jessica started in the elevator, disguising it as casual interest in Laura's choices. At the time, it seemed like just a woman fascinated by someone else's pregnancy. Now, under the cruel fluorescent light of the hospital, it gained a new and monstrous meaning. The woman who asked for pregnancy tips was pregnant. The realization didn't come like a bolt, but like an infiltration of icy water, slow and paralyzing. The air seemed even thinner. Jessica's crying, David's broken words, the constant beep of the heart monitor. Everything became background noise to the deafening buzz of that new truth in her mind. She looked at Jessica's belly, hidden under the loose hospital gown. There was no obvious swell like hers, but there was a certain fullness, a posture she recognized. It was the beginning. The secret Jessica kept wasn't just an affair, it was a consequence. David, immersed in his own pain, didn't notice the focus of Laura's gaze. He took another step toward his wife, anger starting to overtake the shock. "A mistake," he repeated, his voice low and dangerous. "A mistake is taking the wrong exit, Jessica. A mistake is forgetting to pay a bill, being in a car out of town with the neighbor's husband. That's not a mistake. That's a choice you made every day." Each word was a blow. Jessica shrank, her face streaked with tears. "It wasn't like that. I was going to tell you," she lied, her voice weak, seeking any lifeline amid the shipwreck. "Tell me what?" David pressed, his voice rising in volume. "That you were cheating on me? Or were you going to wait for him to leave his pregnant wife to give me the news?" The mention of Laura's pregnancy hung in the air. David looked at Laura for a second, and for the first time, the full dimension of the situation's cruelty seemed to hit him. It wasn't just a betrayal between two couples. It was a betrayal against a woman at her most vulnerable moment. His expression hardened even more, contempt replacing anger. It was at that moment that Michael began to stir on the bed next to them. The sedative was wearing off. He groaned, a low guttural sound, and his eyes opened slowly, blinking to adjust to the light. His first sight was the white ceiling. The second, when he turned his head, was his world crumbling. He saw Jessica crying, saw David standing there tense like an animal about to attack, and finally saw Laura, motionless near the door, her face a blank canvas where he could project all his guilt. "Laura," he whispered, the name coming out with difficulty. Laura didn't respond. She just watched him, her gaze empty, devoid of any emotion he could recognize. Where he expected to see fury or tears, he found only nothing, and that nothing was infinitely more terrifying. Michael's presence, now conscious, changed the room's dynamic. David turned to him, a new target for his fury. "You," he said, his voice loaded with disgust. "You came into my home, shook my hand, ate at my table, and behind my back, you were with my wife." Michael tried to sit up, but the pain in his arm made him recoil with a grimace. "David, calm down. Let's talk," he began, using the appeasing tone of a sales manager that had saved him so many times. But there, in that context, it sounded pathetic. "Talk?" David laughed, a dry sound without humor. "There's nothing to talk about. The scene here speaks for itself." He turned back to Jessica, the focus returning to the source of his pain. "It's over, Jessica. Get your things. I don't want to see you in front of me anymore." It was then that Jessica's desperation reached its peak. The threat of losing everything, her husband, her home, her stability, made her play her last and most terrible card. "You can't do this," she screamed, her voice shrill. "David, I'm pregnant." The silence that fell over the room was absolute, so deep that the beep of the monitor seemed to shout. David froze, his head turned slowly toward her, the expression of total incredulity. Michael, on the other bed, widened his eyes, shock stamped on his face. He didn't know either. That was a part of the secret Jessica had kept just for herself. Laura closed her eyes for an instant. So it was true. The suspicion had been confirmed in the most brutal way possible. She felt the ground disappear under her feet, but her body didn't move. The adrenaline returned full force, a wave of cold energy that kept her upright, watching the final act of that tragedy. David looked at Jessica's belly, then back at her face. His mind worked furiously, trying to process the information, trying to fit it into the timeline of the betrayal. "Pregnant?" he repeated, the word strange in his mouth. A flash of something that could have been joy in other circumstances shone in his eyes, but was immediately extinguished by the poisonous doubt. He looked at Michael, then back at Jessica. The question didn't need to be asked. It was stamped on every tense muscle of his face. "It's yours, David, of course it's yours," Jessica said hastily, her voice slipping in the eagerness to convince him. We were trying, remember? It's yours, I swear." But the oath sounded false. The seed of distrust, once planted, was a weed impossible to uproot. The fact that she had hidden the pregnancy until that moment of desperation was proof that something was wrong. She hadn't shared the news with Joy, but used it as a shield, a weapon of emotional blackmail. Michael, in turn, was pale. He looked at Jessica, then at her belly, then at Laura. His expression was a mix of shock, confusion, and abject fear. His inconsequential adventure had just gained a complication he never imagined. A child, maybe his child, growing in the womb of another man's wife while his own wife carried his legitimate heir. The symmetry was sickening. Laura watched the scene, feeling strangely distant, as if watching a movie. She saw the pieces moving, the bonds breaking, the lies overlapping other lies. She saw the trap Jessica had built for herself. By trying to hold on to her husband with the pregnancy news, she had only lit the fuse of a much bigger bomb. Paternity. David said nothing more. He looked one last time at the woman crying on the bed, then at the man who was the cause of his ruin. There was defeat in his eyes, the bitter acceptance that nothing more could be saved. He turned, his body moving with the stiffness of a much older man, and walked toward the door. He passed Laura without looking at her, but for a second his shoulders slumped, and she felt the weight of the shared pain between them. Then he was gone, leaving behind the silence and the wreckage of two lives. In the room, the three remained, the love triangle, now exposed in all its sordidness. Jessica sobbed quietly. Michael stared into the void, his broken arm the least of his pains. And Laura. Laura finally moved. She walked slowly to Michael's bed. He raised his eyes to her, the plea evident on his face. "Laura, forgive me. Please. I can explain." She looked at him, not with hate, but with a kind of clinical curiosity, like a scientist observing a specimen. "Explain what, Michael?" she asked, her voice calm, level. "That you cheated on me? Or that you cheated on me with the neighbor who pretended to be my friend? Or maybe you want to explain how you had the nerve to do this while I carry your child? And now there's this." Her gaze moved to Jessica, who shrank under the weight of that attention. "You destroyed our family," Laura continued, her voice still low, but each word cutting the air. "You destroyed everything we built." "And why? For someone who's pregnant and doesn't even seem sure who the father is." She didn't wait for a response. There was no response that could fix that. She turned and walked out of the room, leaving the two lovers behind, alone with the ruins of their choices. In the hallway, she didn't stop. She kept walking past the reception, through the automatic glass doors until the cold night air of Seattle hit her face. She breathed deeply, the icy air burning her lungs, but clearing her mind. There were no more tears. There was only a resolution cold and hard as steel. That was the last time she would allow herself to be a victim in that story. From that moment on, she would be the architect of her own future and of justice. The glass doors of the hospital closed behind Laura, muffling the chaos of beeps and voices and leaving her in the cold silence of Seattle's night. She didn't go back to the car immediately. Instead, she walked to an empty concrete bench, under the yellowish light of a street lamp, and sat down. The cold of the stones seeped through the fabric of her pants, but she barely felt it. Her body was numb, a protective shell around the whirlwind of thoughts and the sharp pain that refused to turn into tears. She wouldn't cry. Not there. Crying was a release, and she felt that if she started, she wouldn't be able to stop. She needed her strength intact. She sat there for a time she couldn't measure, watching the cars passing on the avenue, each containing a universe of stories she didn't know. People going home, to their families, to their normal lives. The word normal now seemed to belong to a foreign language. Her life had been bifurcated into a before and an after, and the border was a hospital room with 2 beds and an exposed lie. The phrase she'd said to Michael echoed in her mind. "You destroyed our family." But as she said it, she realized a deeper truth. A family built on such a fragile foundation, so susceptible to the first storm, perhaps was already broken long before the final collapse. The betrayal wasn't the earthquake. It was just the tremor that revealed the cracks she, in her confident happiness, had refused to see. The memories of the last months began to align in a new way, like puzzle pieces rearranged to form a grotesque image. Michael's business trips on weekends, which he justified as essential to hit quotas. The times he came home late, smelling of a perfume that wasn't hers, and said it was from a client on a test drive. The subtle distance, the phone now always face down on the nightstand, the irritability when she asked about his day. Each of those small signs, which she had dismissed as work stress or paranoia from a sensitive pregnant woman, now revealed themselves as red flags she had ignored. She hadn't just been deceived, she had allowed it in her blind trust for the deception to flourish. The hospital door opened again, and a nurse she recognized from the hallway approached cautiously. "Mrs. Thompson, are you okay? You shouldn't be out here in the cold." Laura looked up. "I'm leaving soon, just needed a minute." The nurse hesitated, professional compassion fighting against the desire not to intrude. "Your husband, he's asking for you. He's quite agitated." Laura felt a wave of revulsion. Agitated. He was agitated, as if his comfort was somehow a priority. "Tell him I went home," she replied, her voice firm. "And the other patient," the nurse continued, lowering her voice. Her husband came back. "They're talking to the social worker now." The news hit her with morbid curiosity. David had returned. The man who had left there broken, without looking back, had come back to the epicenter of pain. Maybe out of responsibility, maybe for a formal closure, or maybe because of that terrible word Jessica had thrown into the air. Pregnant. A child, even one whose origin was doubtful, created a bond that couldn't be broken with a simple turn of the back. Impelled by an impulse she didn't fully understand, Laura stood up. She wouldn't go home. Not yet. There was one last chapter to witness that night. She went back into the hospital, but not to the ER wing. She followed the direction the nurse had indicated with her gaze, to a small waiting room near the social services office. From a safe distance, hidden by the impersonal architecture of the hallway, she could see the scene through a glass window. David was sitting in a chair, his body leaned forward, elbows on knees, head in hands. Jessica was in another chair, facing him, and between them, a tired-looking woman, the social worker, trying to mediate the impossible. Jessica's voice was a pleading murmur, audible even through the glass. She gestured, cried, pointed to her own belly. And it was there, in that sterile room, under the cold light, that the last layers of truth were stripped away. Later, a doctor friend of the family, whom Laura had contacted in a moment of lucid desperation, would tell her the details of what was said in that room. Jessica's confession, extracted under the pressure of imminent loss, was a pathetic mix of half-truths and manipulation. She admitted the affair with Michael wasn't new. They'd had a brief involvement years before, soon after moving into the building, something both agreed to end. But the flame, according to her, reignited a few months ago, and the cruelest detail, the final stab at David's trust, was the timeline. She confessed that the rekindling with Michael happened after she found out she was pregnant. The child, she swore up and down, was David's. The conception had occurred during a period when they were actively trying, a last attempt to save a marriage that was already unraveling in silence. But upon finding herself pregnant, instead of getting closer to her husband, she felt panicked, suffocated. And she sought in Michael an escape valve, a dose of adrenaline and attention she felt was missing at home. She didn't love him, she told David. It was a weakness, a stupid mistake, a search for feeling desired in a moment of insecurity. She continued seeing him, even carrying another man's child, because it was easier to live the thrill of the lie than to face the reality of her dying marriage. 2 marriages, 2 homes. 2 lies intertwined by the inconsequence of 2 people who thought only of themselves. Michael, seeking excitement outside a marriage with a pregnant wife. Jessica, using the lover as a bandage for the wounds of her own relationship while carrying a child who deserved more. They weren't tragic lovers. They were just selfish. People who, to satisfy a momentary desire, didn't hesitate to risk the structure of 4 lives and of 2 unborn children. Laura, watching from afar, felt the last remnant of feeling for Michael turn to ashes. It was no longer pain nor anger. It was a deep and bitter contempt. He hadn't betrayed her for a great love, for an overwhelming passion that would redeem him in a romantic tragedy. He had betrayed her out of boredom, out of vanity, for the cheap thrill of an affair with the married neighbor. He had traded the family they were building, the sanctity of their son's birth, for a reheated and sordid fling with a woman who used him as a pastime. She saw David stand up. He didn't say a word. He just looked at Jessica, a long, empty look that seemed to pierce through her. It was the look of a man contemplating the ruins of his own home, knowing there's not a single beam that can be saved. Then he turned and left the room, passing through the hospital's main door and disappearing into the night, this time for good. He didn't look back. Laura also turned and left. There was nothing more to see there. The destruction was complete. She drove home on autopilot, her mind strangely silent. The apartment, once a sanctuary, now seemed like a crime scene. Every object, every photo on the wall, every piece of furniture they chose together was a witness to the lie. She entered the nursery, the yellow onesie still on the floor, and picked it up. The softness of the fabric in her hands was the only real thing in a world that had become a nightmare. She wouldn't dismantle that room. She would finish it, alone. The next morning, the first call she made was to a lawyer, the second to a real estate agent, the third to a moving company. She acted with a cold and methodical efficiency, as if managing an architecture project, not demolishing her own life. Each decision was a step away from him, away from that building, away from the woman in 1202. Michael was discharged late in the afternoon. He called Laura dozens of times, but she didn't answer. Then he took a cab home, probably expecting to find her, ready to use his charm, his apologies, his empty promises. But when he opened the door to apartment 1102, he found it almost empty. Boxes stacked in the corners, blank spaces on the walls where pictures once hung, the echo of a life that no longer existed. On the glass coffee table, the only piece of furniture left in the living room, there was a manila envelope. His name, Michael, was written in Laura's elegant handwriting. With trembling hands, his good arm struggling against the sling immobilizing the other, he opened it. Inside, there was no letter of hate or pain. There were just 3 items. The first was a copy of the accident report, which Laura's lawyer had already obtained, highlighting the cause, speeding on wet pavement. The second was a copy of the latest ultrasound of their son, the black and white image of a perfect profile, a life pulsing, oblivious to his father's sordidness. And the third was a small note with a single sentence. "While you lied, I learned to live." There was no signature. It wasn't needed. Michael stood in the middle of the empty room, looking at those 3 pieces of paper. The proof of his recklessness, the image of his loss, and the declaration of her independence. He didn't have the courage to touch the ultrasound. He just sank to the floor amid the emptiness, and the weight of everything he had lost finally crushed him. The divorce was a quick and brutally efficient process. Laura instructed her lawyer not to negotiate, just execute. She wanted nothing but what was hers by right and her freedom. While the papers moved forward, she settled into a rented apartment in Bellevue, a neighborhood with tree-lined streets and an air of starting over. The space was smaller, simpler, but every square inch was hers. There were no memories of Michael ingrained in the walls, nor the risk of running into Jessica in the elevator. It was neutral territory, a blank canvas. With a calm that surprised her, she began setting up the nursery. She painted the walls a soft gray, assembled the crib with her own hands, following the instruction manual with almost meditative concentration. Each screw tightened, each piece fitted, was an act of construction, an affirmation of her ability to create and sustain a life alone. She didn't feel Michael's absence. In fact, the solitude was productive, silent, allowing her to connect with a strength she didn't know she possessed. The room was ready in a week, a nest of peace and promises, built not on the wreckage of a family, but on the solid foundation of a woman rediscovering herself. The news of the other's outcomes reached her in fragments, through mutual acquaintances and the inevitable network of gossip from the old building. Jessica was discharged 2 days after Michael. David, true to his word, wasn't there to pick her up. He filed for divorce and, in an act of cold mercy, demanded a prenatal DNA test. The result, which arrived weeks later, was the final nail in the coffin of that marriage. The child was indeed his. But the biological confirmation changed nothing. The betrayal of trust had been too deep. David agreed to fulfill all his obligations as a father, but made it clear the marriage was dead and buried. Jessica, now a pariah in the building and abandoned by her lover, would face motherhood in a solitude she had built herself. Michael, in turn, sank. The empty apartment became his prison. The absence of Laura and the life they had was a ghost haunting him in every silent room. He tried calling, texting, begging for a second chance, but Laura had blocked his number. The only communication he received was through the lawyers. He lost focus at work. The shine of the star salesman faded, and the luxury car sales manager became a shadow of himself, now selling only the image of a man who had lost everything. 3 weeks after the accident, on a sunny Saturday morning, the doorbell of Laura's new apartment rang. Her heart skipped a beat, a remnant of the old fear that it was Michael. But when she looked through the peephole, she saw an unexpected figure. It was David Ramirez. She hesitated for a moment, then opened the door. He looked thinner, older, but there was a new, hard resolution in his gaze. He didn't smile. "Sorry to show up like this," he said, his voice low. "I just needed to give you this." He extended an envelope. It wasn't a letter envelope, but one of those larger ones for documents. "What is this?" she asked. "It's a copy of the DNA test and a proposal, mine and my lawyer's." Confused, Laura invited him in. They sat in the small living room, an uncomfortable silence between them. She opened the envelope. She saw the report confirming David's paternity. And below, a legal document. It was a settlement proposal. David was offering her the entirety of the severance penalty that Michael's dealership would have to pay him for moral breach and damages, a substantial amount his lawyer was confident in getting. In exchange, he asked for something that made Laura catch her breath. He asked for shared custody, not of his child, of hers. "I don't understand," Laura said, the paper trembling in her hand. "It's simple," David began, looking not at her, but at the window. "My child is going to be born into a broken home because of your ex-husband. Your child is going to be born without a present father for the same reason. I can't fix what happened to my family, but maybe I can help fix what happened to yours." He finally looked at her, and for the first time she saw not just pain but a fierce determination. "I don't want to be a substitute. I know I'm not his father, but I can be a father figure. I can teach your son to play ball, to be an honest man. I can be there for birthdays, graduations. I can give him a brother. Our children, Laura, they have no fault in any of this. They're the only innocent victims, and they'll be linked forever by their parents' story. Maybe they can grow up together as a family. A different, strange, patched-together family, but a family." Laura stayed silent, the world spinning. The proposal was insane, unprecedented, and at the same time, it made a terrible and profound sense. It was a form of poetic justice she could never have conceived, taking the destruction caused by two people and from it building something new and functional for the two children who were the innocent legacy of that betrayal. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Don't say anything now," he replied, standing up. "Think about it. Talk to your lawyer. The proposal is serious. I'm not doing this out of pity for you. I'm doing this for them." He left, leaving Laura alone with the document and the possibility of a future she never imagined. A week later, her son was born, a healthy boy with curious eyes and strong lungs. On the day she was discharged, she found 2 bouquets of flowers in her apartment. One anonymous with a simple card that said, "Congratulations on our son. Forgive me." She threw it in the trash without reading the rest. The other was a simple arrangement of wildflowers with a handwritten card. "Welcome to the world, kid. Your brother can't wait to meet you. With respect, David." In that moment, holding her son in her arms, Laura knew the answer. She wasn't reborn alone. She was reborn alongside an unlikely ally, in the construction of something no one could foresee. Her revenge wouldn't be seeing Michael suffer. Her revenge would be living. It would be building a family so happy, so unexpected, and so complete that the existence of the person who broke her became finally irrelevant. And what did you think? On a scale of 0 to 10, what score would you give it? Leave your comments saying which city you're watching from, and subscribe to follow our next stories. Thanks so much for the company, and see you next time. A pregnant wife went to visit her friend in her new apartment, and will never forget what happened when the elevator stopped on the 8th floor. The November heat in Atlanta was the kind that wrapped around you like a damp, heavy blanket, thick and unrelenting, pressing against every pore until breathing felt like an effort. The sun glared mercilessly off the high-rise windows of Sarah's brand-new condominium, on the 14th floor of a sleek, modern tower in the heart of Midtown, turning the entire living room into a shimmering greenhouse that seemed to trap every ray and throw it back tenfold. The air carried layered scents, the greasy, salty aroma of fried chicken wafting up from the food truck permanently parked below on Peachtree Street, the acrid bite of exhaust from the endless river of traffic, the sweet, almost cloying perfume of peach cobbler drifting out of someone's open window a few floors down, and beneath it all, that sticky, unmistakable southern humidity that made clothes cling and skin glisten. Jessica paused in the doorway of the apartment, one hand braced against the frame, the other resting atop the massive swell of her 8-month pregnant belly. She wiped a fresh sheen of sweat from the back of her neck with the heel of her hand, feeling the droplets roll slow and deliberate down her spine, tracing the curve of her back until they pooled uncomfortably at the waistband of the loose, light blue cotton sundress she'd chosen because it was one of the only things left that still fit. 8 months pregnant, and she barely recognized the body she now inhabited. The belly round and heavy as an overripe watermelon straining against the fabric, breasts swollen and aching with every breath, lower back curved permanently backward in a painful arch to counterbalance the impossible weight, ankles so swollen that the thin straps of her worn leather flip-flops had left deep, angry red indentations that throbbed with every heartbeat. Every breath felt shallow, every step a conscious, deliberate negotiation with gravity. "Yo, that sectional is not going to fit right there," Sarah laughed, bright and unbothered, hands planted firmly on her slim hips, messy curly bun half undone and frizzing in the humidity, tiny beads of sweat shining like diamonds on her rich brown forehead as she watched the two burly movers, shirts plastered transparently to their broad chests, dark patches spreading beneath their arms, try to wedge the enormous charcoal-grey three-seater sofa between the freshly painted eggshell wall and the towering light oak bookshelf that still reeked sharply of varnish and new beginnings. "It'll fit, ma'am. Just gotta twist it a little and give it some of that good old southern persuasion," the older mover grunted, voice gravelly and thick from decades of dipping Copenhagen, sweat dripping in steady rivulets off his stubbled chin to splatter onto the cool, gleaming hardwood floor that reflected the intense late afternoon light like a mirror. Jessica managed a tired half-smile from the white plastic patio chair she had commandeered the moment she arrived, legs spread as wide as the chair allowed to make room for the belly that dominated her frame, both hands resting heavily on her knees while the baby kicked in a steady, insistent rhythm, left, right, left, like it was two-stepping inside her to some private country song only it could hear. She hadn't left the house for more than an hour at a time in weeks, maybe months now that she really thought about it. This pregnancy had been brutal in ways no one had fully warned her about. Blood pressure that spiked without warning, swelling that turned her fingers into plump sausages that barely bent, dizzy spells that came on suddenly and left her gripping furniture for balance, morning sickness that never stayed confined to mornings and hit hardest at the mere smell of coffee brewing, and Brandon, always Brandon with that soft, worried Georgia drawl. "Just rest, baby. Stay off your feet. I got May." Everything handled, I promise. But when Sarah had called 2 days ago, practically screaming with joy, about finally closing on her dream condo in Midtown, balcony with an unobstructed view of Piedmont Park, open-concept kitchen with quartz countertops, porcelain tile floors that stayed cool even in this heat, the works, something deep in Jessica's chest had sparked like a struck match. She hadn't hesitated. "You have to come see it, Jess. It's gorgeous. I'm in love." Sarah's voice had crackled through the phone, pure, uncontainable excitement, the kind that made you forget swollen feet and acid reflux and the fact that tying your shoes now required strategy and a small prayer. So here she was, planted in the middle of the sweet, chaotic symphony of moving day. Cardboard boxes stacked precariously like Jenga towers, waiting for a careless breath, crumpled newspaper scattered across every surface like confetti after a storm, the greasy, comforting smell of pepperoni pizza drifting from the Domino's box Sarah had ordered, because movers work harder on full stomachs, laughter bouncing off bare walls, still waiting for artwork and memories. Jessica helped where her body allowed, holding lightweight boxes steady while Sarah unpacked, weighing in thoughtfully on furniture placement, running her fingers across fabric swatches to pick curtain colors, while Sarah carefully, reverently unpacked brand new dishes from their foam cocoons, like they were fine china inherited from a grandmother. "Remember when we shared that tiny little apartment off Moreland Avenue junior year?" Sarah asked, slicing open another box of drinking glasses with a bright orange box cutter, the loud rip of cardboard echoing sharply in the brief pocket of quiet between the movers' grunts. "Kitchen the size of a closet? Bathroom so small we had to turn sideways just to brush our teeth. And somehow we still crammed 3 girls and all our drama in there," Jessica finished, laughing until her belly shook, and the baby responded with an enthusiastic kick that felt like a high five from the inside. "And we thought we were living the absolute dream back then," Sarah sighed, pausing to gaze out the massive floor-to-ceiling window that framed the view like a postcard. The sight really did steal your breath away. Lush green treetops of Piedmont Park swaying lazily in the hot breeze, the jagged Atlanta skyline shimmering in the heat haze, a perfect slice of cloudless blue sky stretching endlessly overhead. Now look at us. You married to Brandon? About to be a mama any day now, and me over here with my very own place in the sky. There was a fleeting shadow of sadness beneath her wide smile, the kind she tried to hide, but Jessica caught it. The same ache Sarah had carried for years, watching friends pair off while she focused on career, on herself, on waiting for the right one. She covered it quickly with her usual radiant grin. But it's all good. Everything in God's perfect timing, right? God's timing, Jessica echoed softly, rubbing slow circles over the taut skin of her belly, tracing the faint blue veins that had appeared like rivers on a map, feeling the impossible, miraculous weight that was both burden and sacred gift. The baby kicked hard against her ribs then, a sharp jab that made her let out a small, involuntary oof. But she smiled anyway, wide and genuine. Even with the constant heartburn that felt like fire in her throat, the lower back pain that never fully eased, the pee every 20 minutes routine that had her mapping every public restroom in the city, this was real. She was about to become a mother. And Brandon, despite coming home late most nights now, despite text messages he answered hours later with vague excuses, despite mandatory weekend work trips that seemed to multiply, still seemed excited too. He kissed her belly every single night without fail, pressed his lips gently to the stretched skin, and whispered in that low, reverent voice, "Daddy's right here, little man. I can't wait to meet you." She clung to those moments with everything she had, replayed them like a lifeline whenever doubt crept in. Hours slipped by in a blur of loud laughter, opened boxes, furniture being shoved and rearranged a dozen times, the apartment slowly filling with the mingled scents of hot pizza, fresh paint, and new beginnings. When the sun finally began its slow descent, painting everything in the room in strokes of peach and gold through the bare windows, Jessica felt exhaustion hit her like a Mack truck barreling down I-75. "Girl, I think I got a head out," she said, pushing herself up slowly, laboriously from the plastic chair, both hands supporting her lower back as every vertebra screamed in protest, the baby shifting its weight as if offended by the movement. "Already? The pizza literally just got here. Extra cheese, your favorite, I made sure," Sarah protested, wiping her hands on a paper towel already stained with grease. "Next time, I swear, I'm wiped out. Gotta get home. Put these elephant legs up on about 6 pillows and sleep for 12 straight hours if this little linebacker will let me." Sarah crossed the room carefully, stepping over crumpled newspaper and scattered styrofoam peanuts, and helped Jessica stand, her hands gentle and supportive under Jessica's arms, mindful of the belly that made every movement feel precarious. "Thank you for coming. Seriously. This was 1,000 times better with you here. I needed my best friend today." "Are you kidding? I loved every single second. Your place is absolutely stunning, Sarah. You worked so hard for this. You deserve it all and then some." They hugged hard, the kind of hug that carried 15 years of history. Late-night talks until dawn, tears soaked into each other's shoulders, secrets locked tight between them like treasure. Jessica shuffled down the bright, quiet 14th floor hallway, her flip-flops slapping softly against the shiny new floor, feet dragging a little because every step felt like wading through molasses. The whole building smelled proudly of fresh paint and new construction, that crisp, optimistic scent of a place that hadn't yet been lived in, hadn't yet absorbed heartbreak or joy. She pressed the elevator button with a puffy, swollen finger, shifted her heavy purse higher on her aching shoulder, felt another trickle of sweat slide between her breasts and soak into the cup of her bra. The digital display counted down, slowly, maddeningly. 10, 9, 8. Ding. The doors slid open with a soft, mechanical whoosh, and in that exact, terrible second, Jessica's entire world shattered into a million jagged pieces that would never fit back together the same way. You know those moments when you think it's just a regular day? Hot and ordinary, helping your best friend move into her dream condo, laughing about college memories, feeling the baby dance inside you like it hasn't a care in the world, And then, without any warning at all, the floor drops out from under you and you're in free fall. Sometimes life doesn't send a memo. It doesn't give you a courtesy call. It just hits you with the force of a freight train. And what Jessica was about to see inside that elevator wasn't something any heart, especially not an 8-month pregnant heart swollen with hormones, love, hope, and blind trust, should ever have to witness. The doors parted slowly, agonizingly, like the world itself had switched to slow motion. And there he was. Brandon, her husband of 3 years. The man she'd married on a windy afternoon on Tybee Island, with sand between her toes and tears in her eyes. The man she shared a bed with, bills with, grocery lists with, an entire future with. Stepping casually into the elevator as if he belonged there. But he wasn't alone. He had his arm wrapped possessively around a woman's waist, fingers laced together with an intimacy that sliced straight through Jessica's chest like a hot blade. Laughing that low private laugh she knew better than her own heartbeat, the one he gave when he was truly relaxed, truly happy, when he didn't have to pretend or perform. The woman was pretty in that effortless way some women are, straight honey blonde hair to her shoulders, glossy and perfect even in the humidity. White silk blouse fitted just right to show off a slim figure, dark designer jeans that looked tailored, expensive floral perfume that flooded the small elevator cab like a weapon. They stepped in still whispering, still wrapped up in each other like it was the most natural thing in the world, like they'd done it 100 times before. Jessica felt her stomach flip violently, a wave of nausea rising fast and bitter in her throat. Her heart slammed against her ribcage so hard, she thought she might collapse right there against the cool metal wall, one hand flying instinctively to cradle her belly as if she could somehow shield the innocent life inside from the pain already consuming her. The baby kicked hard, sharp, almost painful, as if it too had felt the lightning bolt of betrayal that ripped through its mother's body. Brandon hadn't seen her yet. He was looking down at the woman, grinning that goofy, lopsided grin that used to be hers and hers alone, saying something low that she couldn't quite catch over the sudden roaring in her ears. "Relax, baby. I grabbed those Sour Patch Kids you like. They're in my backpack." Baby, he called her baby. The same tender word he murmured to Jessica every night when he kissed her forehead and pulled her close. That was the moment Brandon glanced up, his eyes locked on hers across the small space. The smile froze on his face, then died completely. Color drained from his cheeks so fast it was like someone had pulled a plug. The hand holding the woman's went stiff, fingers slowly, guiltily uncurling one by one. For 3 endless seconds, 3 hours, 3 days, 3 lifetimes. No one moved. No one breathed. The elevator doors began to close behind Jessica, then bumped gently against her unmoving body and reopened. Jessica stood pinned against the elevator wall, right hand still cradling her belly like armor, breath caught high in her throat, eyes wide and fixed on him. She couldn't look away, couldn't process, couldn't believe this was real life and not some cruel nightmare she would wake up from any second. The woman beside Brandon frowned, sensing the sudden shift in the air. She glanced up at him, then followed his frozen gaze to Jessica, confusion flickering across her perfectly made-up face. The elevator began its descent, smooth and quiet, indifferent to the catastrophe unfolding inside. 8, 7, 6. The silence was suffocating, thick enough to choke on, heavy enough to crush bones. Brandon opened his mouth. No sound came out. He dropped the woman's hand fast, clumsy, like a child caught with his hand in the cookie jar. The woman noticed the abrupt withdrawal, turned fully now, visibly uneasy, her manicured hand hovering in mid-air. "What's wrong?" she asked, voice low but sharp with rising alarm. He didn't answer, just stared at Jessica, panic screaming from his wide, bloodshot eyes, like a trapped animal realizing the cage door had slammed shut. Jessica finally sucked in a ragged, trembling breath that sounded more like a sob, her whole body shaking, pain tearing her chest apart from the inside out. Both hands clutched her belly now as if she could physically protect her child from the poison already spreading through her veins. 5, 4. The woman looked again, really looked this time. Her gaze traveled slowly, deliberately down to the massive, unmistakable belly stretching Jessica's dress, then to the simple gold wedding band glinting on Jessica's swollen ring finger, then up to the tears already welling and spilling over in Jessica's red-rimmed eyes. And in that moment, she understood. "Brandon," her voice came out small, scared, trembling. "Who is she?" He swallowed hard, the sound loud and grotesque in the deadly quiet. His voice cracked and died in his throat. "Who is this woman?" the mistress demanded again, louder now, stepping away from him as if he'd suddenly become radioactive. The elevator reached the lobby with a gentle, mocking jolt. Ding. The doors opened onto the bright, blissfully air-conditioned lobby, the young concierge glancing up curiously from behind the polished marble desk. Jessica lurched forward on legs that felt like jelly, gripping the cool metal handrail for balance. She had to get out, had to breathe air that didn't smell like another woman's cloying floral perfume, had to escape before she shattered completely in front of strangers. Brandon reached for her arm, cold fingers brushing her hot skin. "Jessica, wait!" She jerked away hard, nearly losing her balance, whirling on him with tears streaming in rivers down her flushed cheeks. "Don't you touch me!" Her voice came out raw, lethal, full of a pain and fury he had never heard from her before in all their years together. The other woman stood frozen in the elevator doorway, mouth open in shock, watching the scene unfold like a nightmare she couldn't wake from. She's your wife." Her voice shook with shock and rising fury as the truth sank in. "And 8 months pregnant." Brandon said nothing, because there was nothing he could say that wouldn't damn him forever. Jessica stumbled through the expansive lobby, legs heavy as concrete, vision blurred by unstoppable tears that kept coming, no matter how hard she tried to blink them away. The concierge half rose from his chair, concern creasing his face as he started to ask if she was okay. But she didn't hear him, didn't see anything except the exit. She shoved through the heavy glass doors and out onto the wide sidewalk. The Atlanta heat slapped her like a physical wall, the late afternoon sun still blazing down mercilessly. Traffic roared past on Peachtree, horns blaring impatiently, people rushing by in sunglasses and summer dresses, electric scooters whirring, everything distant and muffled and underwater. She stopped dead on the sidewalk, cradling her belly with both arms wrapped protectively around it, trying to breathe, trying not to collapse in front of the entire city. And then the tears came for real, hot, huge, soaking the neckline of her dress, dripping onto the scorching pavement in tiny dark spots that evaporated almost instantly. Jessica sank slowly, carefully onto the curb, her purse dumped unceremoniously beside her, hands shaking violently as she tried to open the Uber app, fat swollen fingers hitting wrong buttons again and again, the screen blurring behind endless tears. Behind her, the building doors burst open with force. Fast, frantic footsteps on concrete. "Jessica, Jessica, please wait." His voice, desperate, shattered, completely unrecognizable as the calm, confident man she'd married. She didn't turn around, didn't want to see his face, didn't want him to exist in her world right now. He dropped to his knees in front of her on the hot pavement, panting, face flushed red, hands resting helplessly on his thighs. "Let me explain." "Explain what?" Her voice cracked, but burned with pure, righteous rage. "I saw you holding her hand, fingers locked like y'all were love-struck teenagers calling her baby. It wasn't what you think. Wasn't." Jessica finally looked up at him, and whatever Brandon saw in her eyes made him physically flinch as if she'd slapped him across the face. Those were eyes that had once looked at him with love, desire, absolute trust, now utterly destroyed, hollowed out. "Then tell me what it was. Tell me right now, Brandon." He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Nothing came out, because there was no version of this story that saved him. "I was gonna tell you," he started weakly, voice barely above a whisper. "Were you? When, exactly? After the baby was born? After I caught you kissing her in front of my face, or never? I was ending it today, I swear to God, Jess." She let out a bitter, humorless laugh that hurt her own soul, sharp and jagged. "Ending it today? Right. That's why you were walking into that elevator wrapped around her like vines, grinning ear to ear, buying her candy like you're the most devoted man on earth. Brandon raked both hands through his hair, frantic now, eyes wet and shining. It was a mistake. A huge, stupid mistake. But I love you, Jess. I love you and our son. You don't love anybody, Brandon. You're just scared of losing your perfect little family image. Scared of losing the dumb, trusting wife who believed every single lie you fed her. She hauled herself up slowly, painfully from the curb, one hand braced under her heavy belly, the other against the lamppost for support. Her Uber was pulling up, a silver Camry with the little glowing sign in the window. I'm going home, and you don't touch me. Ever again. You hear me? Jess, I said don't touch me. Her scream cut through the street noise like a blade. Heads turned. People stopped walking mid-stride. A woman with a stroller stared openly. The Uber rolled to a stop at the curb. Jessica yanked the back door open with trembling fingers and slid carefully inside, slamming and locking it behind her. Brandon slapped the window hard with his open palm. Jessica, please, open up. We gotta talk, and I'm begging you. She stared straight ahead at the driver, voice steady despite the tears still pouring. Just drive, please. Anywhere but here. The car pulled smoothly away from the curb, leaving Brandon kneeling in the road, alone, wrecked, watching the taillights disappear around the corner into traffic. Inside the Uber, the AC blasted cold on Jessica's flushed, tear-soaked face, a physical relief that didn't touch the inferno raging inside her chest. She tried slow, deep breaths, but the air wouldn't come fully. It caught on sobs she was fighting to keep quiet. The driver, older black gentleman with a neat grey beard and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, glanced at her repeatedly in the rearview mirror, concern etched deep into the lines of his face. You all right back there, sweetheart? Need me to stop somewhere? Drugstore, hospital, police station? She just shook her head numbly, wiping tears with the back of her swollen hand, trying not to sob out loud in front of this kind stranger. He didn't push further. Just reached over and turned up the radio softly, an old Otis Redding ballad about love and pain, and sitting on the dock of the bay, cruelly fitting in its melancholy. Jessica leaned her head against the cool window and closed her eyes, but the images looped mercilessly behind her eyelids. Brandon stepping into the elevator with that private smile, not meant for her. His fingers laced so comfortably with another woman's. That smile aimed at someone else. His voice soft and intimate. Relax, baby. How many times had he said that exact phrase to her in bed, arms wrapped around her from behind, lips against her ear? How many times had he lied straight to her face while she smiled and believed him? How long had this been going on right under her nose while she waddled around the house alone, swollen and trusting? She rubbed her belly in slow, soothing circles, feeling the baby shift restlessly as if it sensed her turmoil. I'm sorry, she whispered, voice breaking so low the driver couldn't hear over the music. I'm so sorry, little one. You didn't deserve to come into this mess. Mama's gonna protect you. I swear on everything. The Uber wound its way through familiar Atlanta streets, past neighborhoods glowing orange in the fading sunset, folks heading home with grocery bags swinging, kids playing basketball on cracked driveways, couples holding hands on front porches, normal life happening all around. While inside the car, Jessica's entire world lay in shards too small to ever glue back together. She got home after full dark had fallen. Their Buckhead apartment was cold, quiet, empty. Too empty. She dropped her purse with a heavy thud on the hardwood entryway, double-locked the door as if that flimsy bolt could keep the nightmare out. Then she crumbled. Didn't even make it to the couch. Collapsed right there on the living room floor, back pressed hard against the wall, trying to hug her knees. But the belly wouldn't let her fold that way anymore. The crying came hard, violent, chest-heaving sobs that stole her breath entirely, made her whole body shake uncontrollably. The baby kicked wildly, as if feeling every wail and trying to comfort her from the inside. Why? She sobbed between gasps that sounded more like screams. Why did he do this to me? Why now? Why like this? Why wasn't I enough? She pounded the floor once with her fist, frustrated, devastated, nails scraping hardwood, leaving tiny crescent marks. How many times had she believed him without question? How many times had she called herself paranoid, hormonal, crazy for even wondering? Baby, it was just a late meeting. I'm sorry. Sweetheart, my phone died at the office. Honey, I'm exhausted. Let me sleep, okay? And she'd swallowed every lie whole, smiled, kissed him goodnight, and gone to sleep believing she was safe. It took nearly an hour to drag herself up from the floor, legs numb and tingling, face swollen almost beyond recognition. She shuffled to the bedroom like a ghost, peeled off the sweaty sundress that now felt tainted, stood under a scalding shower that did nothing to wash away the pain. Water mixed with tears ran in rivers down her belly, over silver stretch marks, down the drain with her trust. She threw on an old t-shirt of Brandon's she found in the drawer, then ripped it off again in a surge of rage and hurled it across the room like it burned her. Curled up in bed in something else, soft and unfamiliar, stared at the blank ceiling while her mind replayed the elevator scene on an endless, cruel loop. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. Brandon. Jess, please answer. I need to talk to you. She blocked the number with shaking fingers. Another buzz, different number. It's me, don't block me, we have to fix this, I'm so sorry. Blocked again. Then the house phone rang, shrill and insistent. Sarah. Jessica answered but couldn't speak past the lump in her throat. Jess, you there, baby? Yeah, she finally croaked, the single word scraping her raw throat. What happened? Brandon just showed up at my door banging like a madman saying you caught him with another woman in the elevator. Is it true? Tell me it's not true. Jessica closed her eyes. Fresh tears spilled immediately. Yeah, it's true. A sharp, vicious curse from Sarah that would have made their mamas clutch pearls. That son of a bitch, that absolute bastard. Sarah, I need a favor, a big one. Anything, name it. Ask your concierge if Brandon's ever been to your building before, like multiple times. Long, heavy pause on the line. You think it wasn't the first time? I need to know, please. Okay, I'm marching down there right now. I'll call you back in 10. 2 hours later, 2 agonizing hours of staring at the wall, the phone rang again. Jessica snatched it up with trembling hands. And? Sarah exhaled hard, the sound full of rage and pity. Jess, the concierge confirmed everything. Her heart sank like concrete dropped into the Chattahoochee River. Confirmed what exactly? That he recognized Brandon instantly. Said he'd been there multiple times. Last week, the week before that. For months, Jess. Months. Silence stretched between them, deep and cutting. Said Brandon would show up in the afternoon, stay 2 to 3 hours, leave before evening traffic. Always with the same woman. The blonde one. Jessica couldn't hold it together anymore. The crying came again, but deeper now, soul deep. The kind that rearranges your insides. Because now she knew without a shadow of doubt. It wasn't a fling. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a one-time slip he regretted. It was routine. It was habit. It was deliberate choice again and again and again. The betrayal had roots, long, deep, ugly roots that had been growing while she carried his child. Sarah kept talking, trying to comfort, cursing Brandon creatively, promising vengeance and wine and whatever Jessica needed. But Jessica didn't hear most of it. She hung up eventually, curled on her side in the dark, arms wrapped protectively around her belly. It's going to be okay, she whispered to her son, voice shattered into 1,000 pieces. I promise, we're going to be okay. But right then, alone in the dark, she had no earthly idea how. The next morning, Jessica woke aching everywhere. Head, heart, back, feet, eyes nearly swollen shut from crying, skull pounding like the worst hangover of her life. She glanced at Brandon's empty side of the bed. He hadn't come home, or maybe she hadn't let him. She dragged herself to the kitchen, made chamomile tea she didn't drink, sat staring at the steaming mug as if it held answers. The intercom buzzed harshly. She shuffled over, already knowing. Hello? Jess, it's me. Please let me up. Please let me explain. I'm begging you. Brandon's voice, rough, exhausted, pleading, nothing like the confident man she'd fallen for. No. Jess, please. I said no. She hung up. He kept buzzing. Over and over and over until her nerves were raw. Finally, bone-tired and empty, she buzzed him in just to make the noise stop. 2 minutes later, he stood in the doorway looking like hell itself. Same clothes from yesterday, wrinkled and sad. Eyes bloodshot and puffy. Unshaven shadow across his jaw. Smelled like despair and cheap motel soap. "Can I come in?" She stepped aside without a word, arms crossed protectively over her belly. Brandon walked to the middle of the living room, hands hanging useless at his sides, shoulders slumped. "Jess, I messed up. I know I messed up bad. But it wasn't what you think, wasn't?" She crossed her arms tighter. "Then tell me what it was, Brandon. Tell me what I saw with my own 2 eyes." He swallowed hard, Adam's apple bobbing. I met her a few months ago. At work. We started talking, and I don't know how it happened, but it did. It just happened. Months, Jessica repeated, voice trembling with fresh rage. "Months, Brandon. While I was here pregnant, sick as a dog, handling everything alone, you were with her, touching her, calling her baby. It wasn't like..." "Then what was it like?" The scream tore out of her so deep it scared even her, echoing off the walls. Brandon physically stepped back, hands up in surrender. "I was going to end it, I swear to you." "You were ending it the day you walked into that elevator wrapped around her, calling her baby, buying her damn candy." He had no answer, because there was none that wasn't a lie. "You know what the concierge told Sarah?" Jessica continued, voice dropping colder now, sharp as broken glass. "That you'd been there dozens of times. Dozens, Brandon. That wasn't a mistake. That was a choice. Every single day you woke up and chose her over me and your son. I chose you too. I'm here, aren't I? I'm standing here fighting for us. Because I caught you. If I hadn't walked into that elevator yesterday, you'd still be lying, still cheating, still making a complete fool of me while I sat home growing your child." Brandon dropped to his knees right there on the living room hardwood, sobbing like a child. "I love you, Jess. I love you. I don't want to lose you, don't want to lose my son." She looked down at the man she'd loved with every cell in her body, the man she'd chosen, trusted, built a life with, and felt nothing but cold, hollow emptiness. "You already lost us," she said, voice steady and final. "The day you decided to hold her hand, the day you decided to lie to my face, the day you decided I wasn't enough." He kept crying, head bowed, shoulders shaking, but she turned away, walked to the window and stared out at the city that suddenly felt foreign. "Pack your stuff and get out. Jess, get out." He stumbled up eventually, went to the bedroom, shoved clothes into a duffel bag with shaking hands, came back out sniffling, stopped in front of her one last time, eyes red and pleading. "I'll change. I swear on everything. I'll be the man you deserve. Just give me a chance." Too late. He walked out slowly, closing the door softly behind him as if slamming it would make the finality worse. And Jessica was alone, truly, completely alone for the first time in years. She sank onto the couch, rubbed her belly in slow circles, took a shaky breath that still hurt. "We're gonna be okay," she whispered to her son. "We're gonna be okay." But she didn't believe it yet. That afternoon, after hours of staring into space, Jessica made a decision that felt like taking her life back into her own hands. She wasn't going to drown alone in silence. She wasn't going to let Brandon walk away unscathed while she carried all the pain. She opened her phone with purpose, searched. Family law attorney Atlanta Best Divorce Custody. Dozens of names popped up. One caught her eye immediately. James Carter, Esky. Family law. High asset divorce. Custody. "I understand betrayal because I've lived it." She clicked the website. Read his bio slowly, tears blurring the screen. "I understand betrayal because I've lived it. That's why I fight. For you, for your peace, for your fresh start." Something in the words rang like a bell inside her shattered chest. Jessica scheduled a consultation for the very next day. James Carter's office sat on the 20th floor of a sleek glass tower on Peachtree in Buckhead. Jessica stepped into the elevator with her heart in her throat. After what happened, just the sight of elevator doors made her stomach lurch violently and her palms sweat. But she had to do this for herself, for her son, for the future she now had to build alone. When the doors opened on 20, a smiling receptionist with kind eyes led her down a hallway lined with abstract art to a bright corner office with sweeping views of the city and a sliver of green from Piedmont Park in the distance. The AC was ice cold, pure bliss after the scorching street below. Jessica lowered herself carefully into a plush grey chair, clutching her purse like a life raft, palms sweaty, heart racing. The door opened, and he walked in. James Carter was younger than she expected, mid-30s maybe, tall but not imposing. Light blue dress shirt with sleeves rolled once, no tie, dark hair neatly trimmed, but with a slight wave. But it was his eyes that stopped her cold. Tired eyes, kind eyes. Eyes that had clearly seen too much pain themselves. Jessica. He extended a hand, gentle smile. James Carter, it's a pleasure to meet you. She shook it, surprised by the steady warmth of his grip. Have a seat. Make yourself comfortable. You're safe here. Those 3 words, "you're safe here," made her eyes burn with fresh tears she hadn't expected. She sat again, adjusting awkwardly for the belly that made every chair feel too small. James grabbed a yellow legal pad and pen, sat across from her at a respectful distance. Before we start anything, everything you say in this room stays in this room. No judgment. I'm just here to listen. Okay? She nodded, throat tight. So, tell me what happened. From the beginning. And she did. Everything. With long pauses between sentences, with tears that fell silently, with silences heavier than any words. The elevator, the embrace, the intertwined fingers, the word baby that shattered her. The concierge confirming months of visits. The pain of realizing it wasn't a mistake, it was a double life. James listened without interrupting once, without looking away, without the pity she dreaded. When she finally finished, voice hoarse and spent, he was quiet for a long moment, then leaned forward slightly. Jessica, I know exactly how you feel. She looked up, startled, eyes wide. I was cheated on too. The air in the room stilled completely. 4 years ago, my ex-wife, with her co-worker, for almost a year. I found out the worst way possible. I saw them together at Lenox Square Mall on a random Saturday. Jessica held her breath, afraid to move. And I know the rage, the grief, the soul-crushing feeling that somehow you weren't enough, that you should have done something different, that you should have seen it. He paused, voice softening. But it's not true. None of it was your fault. Nothing you did or didn't do justifies what he did. Nothing. For the first time in days, a tear fell that wasn't pure pain. It was relief. Being seen. Being understood by someone who had walked the same fire. James continued, voice steady. That's why I do family law now. Because I've sat right where you're sitting, feeling like my world ended. And I promise you I will fight for you the way I wished someone had fought for me. He picked up his pen again. Let's start simple. Do you want the divorce? Yes, she answered without hesitation. All right. Custody of the baby? Full custody, sole legal and physical. He can have supervised visitation if the court insists, but I want final say on everything. James wrote it down carefully. Shared assets, condo, cars, retirement accounts. Condos in both names, his truck too. Joint savings, some investments. Perfect. We'll inventory everything. I'll need documents, marriage certificate, proof of residence, bank statements last 12 months if you have them, titles, retirement account statements. Jessica nodded, mentally cataloguing even through the fog of exhaustion. Does the affair affect anything legally in Georgia? James sighed, setting his pen down. Georgia is a no-fault state, so adultery itself doesn't change property division much anymore. But it can matter for custody if we show neglect, prioritizing another relationship while his pregnant wife was home alone and high risk. That weighs heavily with a judge, especially when the child is this young. He met her eyes directly, unflinching. But winning on paper isn't the most important thing, Jessica. The most important thing is you walking out of this hole, with your peace, your dignity, and your son safe and loved. Tears threatened again, but she blinked them back. You deserve that, and I'll move heaven and earth to make sure you get it. Jessica managed a tiny, shaky smile, the first since that cursed elevator. The consultation lasted almost 2 hours. James explained every step patiently, filing timeline, discovery, temporary orders, mediation possibilities, child support guidelines, asset division formulas, visitation schedules, if any. Never cold, never rushed, just deeply, quietly human. When it ended, Jessica rose carefully, hand on her lower back. James walked her to the door. Day or night, question or panic attack at 3 a.m. Call me. Here's my cell. He handed her a simple white business card with his personal number handwritten on the back. She looked at the card, then at him. Thank you, really. You have no idea. Anytime. She turned to leave, but he called softly. Jessica. She looked back. He hesitated, choosing his words with care. When this is all behind you, you're going to rediscover how strong you are. Stronger than you know right now, and I hope I'm still around when that day comes. Her heart gave a small, unexpected flutter. Nothing overt, nothing inappropriate, just something gentle, a quiet possibility on the horizon. Jessica smiled again, this one a little wider, a little more real. Thank you, James. Anytime. She stepped into the elevator and for the first time in days, took a full, deep breath without her chest caving in on itself. Outside, the November sun still blazed overhead, brutal and unrelenting. The heat was still oppressive, but somehow Jessica felt lighter, as if a tiny crack had opened and let the faintest ray of light in. She walked to the bus stop, sat on the hot concrete bench, rubbed her belly in slow circles. The baby moved, gentle, calm, reassuring. We're gonna be okay, sweet boy, she whispered. Mama promises. And this time, for the first time, she actually believed it. 2 weeks later. Jessica was at home sorting the mountain of documents James had requested when her phone rang. Unknown number. She answered cautiously. Hello? Jessica, it's James. Sorry to call after hours, but I have news. Her pulse jumped hard. What kind of news? Brandon contacted the firm today. He wants to talk, wants to try an out-of-court settlement, says he doesn't want to drag this through the mud. She sank onto the couch, hand on her belly. What does that mean exactly? It means he's scared. Knows if we go to trial he'll lose a lot more than money, so he wants to negotiate, make it quick and quiet. Do you think I should even talk to him? James paused, considering. Depends what he offers, but I'll be right beside you the whole time. He won't manipulate you, not on my watch. You say the word and we walk away. She exhaled shakily. Okay, let's do it. Great. I'll set it for next week. And Jessica? Yeah? You're doing amazing. Seriously. It may not feel like it every minute, but you are. She smiled despite everything. Thank you. When she hung up, she looked out the window at the Atlanta skyline. Night was falling. Lights winked on one by one across the city, tiny promises of new beginnings scattered like stars. And for the first time since that elevator, Jessica felt something she thought was gone forever. Hope. 3 days later, James called again, voice calm but triumphant. Jessica, it's done. Brandon caved. Accepted every single term. Everything? Everything. You get full custody. He'll pay above-guideline child support, and he's signing over his entire share of the condo. No buyout, no fight. She sat in stunned silence, hand over her mouth. Why would he do that? Just give up? Because I laid out exactly what would happen in court. Showed the concierge affidavit. Showed screenshots of text messages the other woman sent a friend bragging about the length of the affair, and how she thought he was leaving you after the baby. He realized he had no shot at looking like anything but the villain. Jessica let out a small, incredulous laugh that surprised even her. So it's really over. It's really over. Just need signatures and the judge's stamp. I'll file Monday. Tears came then, but this time from pure, overwhelming relief. Thank you, James. Thank you for everything. I wouldn't have made it through this without you. I'm honored you trusted me, truly. Comfortable silence stretched on the line. Then James, softer. Jessica, I know it's soon. I know you just climbed out of hell. But when you're ready, when it feels right, when you've healed, I'd really like to get to know you. Outside the office. No files, no paperwork. Just coffee or dinner or whatever feels okay. Her heart skipped, but not from fear. She hadn't expected it. But it didn't scare her. Actually, it felt nice, warm, possible. I'd like that too, she answered gently. But you're right. It's soon. I need to find myself again first. Heal. Be whole for my son. I know. And I'll wait. As long as it takes. Promise? Promise. When she hung up, Jessica stared at her phone with a goofy little smile she hadn't worn in months. The baby kicked hard, like he approved of the new direction. Easy there, little man, she laughed, rubbing the spot. We'll meet him in a few months. Be patient. 2 months later. Jessica sat in the hospital room cradling a tiny, red-faced, perfect baby boy who had arrived screaming into the world at 3:17 a.m. after 18 hours of labor. Hi, sweet boy, she whispered, tears of pure joy streaming down her cheeks as she counted 10 perfect fingers and 10 perfect toes. I waited so long for you. You're finally here. Sarah stood beside the bed, squeezing her hand so hard it hurt, crying harder than Jessica. He's perfect, Jess. Absolutely perfect. Look at that hair. Yeah, she breathed, staring at her son in complete awe. He is. Jessica glanced at the door. Brandon had texted multiple times asking to see his son. She'd said no, maybe one day, maybe never. But that was her choice now, and that was okay, because everything she needed was right here in this room. Her son, her best friend, and herself, stronger, wiser, reborn. 3 months later. Jessica sat at a little outdoor cafe on the Beltline, her son dozing peacefully in the stroller beside her, while runners jogged past and dog walkers waved, the breeze off the trees carrying the scent of spring. Across the table, James stirred sugar into his iced coffee, grinning at the sleeping baby. He's gotten so big, and that smile, he's gonna break hearts. Thank you, Jessica smiled, warmer and freer than she'd felt in years. And stubborn, just like his mama. They laughed together, easy and light. It was their third date. First had been a quick lunch downtown. Second, a slow walk in Piedmont Park pushing the stroller. Now this lazy Saturday coffee with sunshine and possibility in the air. Nothing rushed, nothing forced. Just happening naturally. How are you feeling? James asked, voice soft with genuine care. Better. So much better. Some days the anger still flares up out of nowhere, like a surprise attack. But Ace, I'm good. Really good, happy. I'm so glad. He reached across the table and took her hand. Gentle, asking permission with his eyes first. You're incredible, Jessica. I hope you know that by now. She felt her cheeks warm, but she didn't pull away. You two. They sat there holding hands in the sunlight, watching people pass, listening to birds and distant traffic, and her son's soft baby snores, while the world spun gently on. And in that moment, for the first time in forever, Jessica knew without a doubt, she had survived. She had risen from the ashes, and she was ready to live again, fully, fiercely, joyfully. Life isn't about perfect endings. It's about new beginnings, about scars that become strength, about pain that turns into wisdom and compassion. Jessica stepped into that elevator, thinking she was just visiting a friend on an ordinary day. She stepped out with her heart in 1,000 pieces. But today, looking back from the other side, she sees it clearly. That was the day her real life began. The day she discovered she was so much stronger than she ever imagined. The day losing everything became the first step to gaining the world. And James? He wasn't a knight in shining armor riding in to save her. He was just a good man who'd been broken too, who understood that real love means patience, respect, and waiting for the right time, no matter how long it takes. And Jessica? She didn't need saving anymore, but she chose to let James be part of her joy anyway. And that, my friend, that makes all the difference. If you've made it this far, thank you so much for following this story. If it touched you in any way, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next stories. And tell me here in the comments, have you ever been in a similar situation?